Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment and another episode. And as our custom here, first, I would like to personally thank Carrington for coming because I know that her time is precious. Her journey is precious. It is a personal thing, both her time and her journey. And I count it an honor that she stopped by and entrusted us at this time, and it is my hope that I create a space that is welcoming for her and it is a place where she can be herself. Carrington, I want to thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. I just want you to introduce yourself to the people and let's go into this thing, girl. I'm excited about our conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, my name is Carrington Smith, and I grew up in my early years on the East Coast of the United States. And then we moved across the country to Seattle, Washington, which is where I grew up primarily. I am college educated, professional, a former lawyer. Well, I'm still a lawyer, but I don't practice anymore. Now I have an executive search business, which is my primary source of income. And then, of course, during COVID, I wrote a book, which is what we're going to talk about today. But the two things I want to emphasize the most about myself is that, one, I'm a single mom. And my heart goes out to other single moms. I had the advantage of being able to afford a nanny. But let me tell you, I so appreciate and want to honor the single moms out there who have no family support or ability to afford childcare. My heart goes out to you, and I get your path. And the second thing I want to emphasize about myself is I consider myself to be ordinary. I don't consider myself to be exceptional. And the reason I emphasize that is because for years I would write stories which culminated in the book. And I would ask myself, like, who's going to care about these? Like, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not, a former professional athlete. I'm not a Holocaust survivor. I'm not a recovering addict. You think about all the memoirs you pick up, there's usually some component of something like that. And I'm not a business titan. I'm just an ordinary girl trying to make it in the world, single mom, living, the life experiences like everybody else. And I finally realized when COVID hit that it was my very ordinariness that made my story compelling. Because with COVID, we were all experiencing a universal trauma. And I realized that the traumas that I had experienced from, being raped, divorce, debt, sexual harassment, death of loved ones, loss of friends, all the things that I had gone through were things that were universal. And that meaning most of us go through those things at some point in life. I mean, hopefully not sexual assault, but, death of loved ones and just different life traumas. And I realized that it was my response to COVID that was so unique. And I responded so differently from others because of my life experience. And that's why I decided to write the book. When COVID hit, while everybody else was filling their recycle bins with wine bottles and liquor bottles because they just were like, what am I going to do? How do I deal with this? I saw it as an opportunity. My thought process was, oh my gosh, this is one of those great moments in history that we read about. Mm-hmm. This is like, a war or the Great Depression, or of course the previous pandemic. I mean, during the Great Depression, that's when something like 75% of all the Fortune 500 companies were founded. Yep. So I saw this as a massive opportunity. And I started looking for the opportunity in the adversity. I was like, well, what can we get out of this? I also saw the break in time as a once in a lifetime sort of imposed sabbatical where we had an opportunity to do things that maybe we had always wanted to do, but never had the time or space to do. And that's why I was like, wow. I took that opportunity to write the book. So my response was one also of resilience of I've been through so much already, kind of like bring it. I mean, I know I can get through this. I've already gotten through so much. And so I kind of asked myself, like, why am I responding so differently than so many others? And I wrote the book as a gift to humanity. I hope, with the hope to touch people's lives and share with them my story of how I've gotten through trauma and use that, to improve my life. And, I don't believe in telling people what to do. I believe in that people learn through stories. And so that's why I wrote it as a memoir, and hopefully people can learn from my experiences. So I hope it's a blessing to others.
That is powerful. I love how you responded, because I believe COVID was a gift to mankind to reset.
I agree.
And I believe that people were pregnant with much, and had not COVID taken place, many of those pregnancies would have been aborted. And those pregnancies were books, new jobs, new companies, new podcasts, new things.
Yeah.
And I believe that was one of the reasons for the entrance of it, because when you look at COVID, it was very interesting. It prevented the most basic need within the human species, and that is the need to touch, to communicate, and to hold hands and so forth. And so we were forced, I believe, or given the opportunity, if you understood what it was there for, to go within the self, to learn about the self. And then from that journey, then you can perceive and move from the outside, and then to, as I said earlier, give birth to those things that were dormant, that were laying there, but because of our busyness of doing things and not truly living, we tend to abort those pregnancies that are within us. I want to take you back a little, Carrington, to go back to your childhood, because that's where a lot of our trauma are, how we perceive an incident that happens within a family. Sometimes it looks very normal, but how we as children perceive that incident will create that trauma. And from that trauma, we will make our decisions, how we deal with people, how we function, and stuff like that. I want you to introduce us to you, your family, and that particular aspect of your life.
Wow. Well, I grew up with a father who was what I later learned, a malignant narcissist. He absolutely dictated how all of us lived. We were all orbiting around him. He set up an environment where I was in competition, not only with my siblings, but also with my mother for his affection and approval. It was a very sick environment. He fostered not just competition, but he would periodically decide someone was the black sheep and have the others gang up on that person. So you never could trust your siblings or my mother, because I never knew who was going to turn on me at any given minute. It was a very, very sick dynamic. And he was not just, he was more spiritually and emotionally and mentally abusive than he was physically abusive when he did hit us. But it was really more about what he did with our brains than anything. And I guess in my mind, the worst thing he did was, while claiming to be a Christian and telling us how to live our lives spiritually, he actually separated us from God. And I got to a point where I thought like his opinion was God's opinion. And I basically had no conduit to heaven, because, my father had this hotline to heaven, as I like to call it. And so substituted his judgment for God's. So it was a really sick environment. But
how did that's a recipe for trauma all over the place. From your conversation and from you talking, you mentioned one of the things, several things there, but one thing that I picked up and heard was trust, because of the high competition within the family, that even to the place where you cannot trust your mom, and that is epic in a child's life, and especially with your siblings. That should be an area, a safe zone, if you wish, but it seems as if it is a highly competitive, traumatized breeding ground. So how did you manage your life within that? How did you look at your outside world based on that, meaning your friends and the ones outside of your family unit? How did you perceive them when they enter into your space?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that, I actually have a fairly high degree of trust with people. But I think I always do kind of hold a little something back. And I think if you read my book, you'll understand why. Because whenever I would let my guard down, something would happen. I'd have a friend say something horrible or do something horrible. But I think maybe that's part of why I ended up so spiritual, is that I had to look inward because there really wasn't any other place to go. Just about developing an internal dialogue at a pretty young age. And, I'm just thinking of a moment when I asked my brother for help and confided in him something, and he turned around and told my parents. And that was specifically what I asked him not to do. But that was pretty much par for the course. I mean, I couldn't trust my own sibling with something because, he used it to cause a wedge in the family. And but that's how we were programmed. So it's sad, but.
That is, after this, I'll tell you a story about me.
Okay.
About something similar, but it wasn't a sibling. It was my father, actually. Since this show is about talking the truth, it was my father. I came to him about a situation, and I sat down with him, and I said to him, I need to talk to you, but I need to talk to you, son to a father. I need to talk to you, but I want this to be between you and I. I need my dad, basically, is what I had said to him. And he agreed that he would keep it between him and I. And then he told my mother, and it caused a wedge between him and I, because I told him, I said, I actually had stopped talking to my dad for many, many years because of that, because of trust issues as well. Because I said to him, you did not give me the option. You should have told me that and I get, his point of view, but he should have said that to me. He says, your mom and I don't keep anything from each other. I get that. But when I came to you and I requested to have that conversation where you would, it would be between you and I, that was the space that you ought to have said, well, son, I don't keep anything from your mother. Then I would have had the choice whether to have that conversation or not. And because we didn't have that, I didn't have that choice. That trust I felt was eroded, and I had stopped talking to my dad for many years based on that because of trust. So I understand when you talk about it. So,
yes. So I've never been able to go to my brother ever again, ever. He showed me who he was. I believe him. And so I learned, you're right. Part of what I learned was I didn't have the safety net that other people have. I didn't have, the ability to trust, particularly, now I trust my sister, but for years, any of them, my brother, sister, mother, I couldn't share something with them and believe that it was a safe space.
Yeah. It took me years to mend that relationship because my dad, and you had started about single mom. I was a single dad with 4 boys.
So, oh, wow. Wow. My hat is off to you.
I can attest to some of the challenges within that space of single parenting. Here you are, you're in this situation, and your family unit is challenging, and it gives you an opportunity to be offended, as they say, and your brother caused an offense. As you are growing up and you're moving through school, high school and college, talk to me a little about your college years. How was that? How did you, through all of this trauma that is taking place within your family, and you are managing that, how did you manage it when you move into a institution as vast and diverse as college?
Well, it was, college was a bit of a rough ride for me because I started out at Washington State University, which is a public school in Washington State. And I was there because my parents asked me to stay in state, attend college in state, because I had a brother at Stanford and a sister at the University of Southern California. which are both private schools. And basically there had become a pattern in my family where my brother, the firstborn male, and my sister, the firstborn female, were given preference and priority financially, for opportunities, for everything. And so they asked me to attend in-state so they could continue to pay for my brother and sister. So I went off to Washington State, and my sophomore year, I was raped. And when I was raped, I told a sorority sister, and she told me that she cautioned me and warned me that another sorority sister had been raped the year before, and she had gone to the police, and she ended up getting kicked out of the sorority, labeled a slut, and, basically had the tables turned on her, received no support. And so she said, really be careful, because if you tell anyone here at school, you're likely to get kicked out of the sorority house. I know that's just unfathomable to people today, but that was my reality. So I, didn't tell anyone. I ended up getting very, very depressed because I wasn't talking about it, wasn't getting the help that I needed. And finally at Thanksgiving break, I went home and I shared with my mother that I had been raped. And sort of the punchline to all of this to me, the irony of it all, my mother was the executive director for the Crisis Pregnancy Center, which is a anti-abortion pregnancy support group that counsels people who get pregnant when they don't want to. And so she had been regularly counseling young women in crisis, oftentimes who had been raped or whatnot, about what their pregnancy options were. And so here I share with her that I had been raped, and her response to me was to turn beet red, get really angry, and say, I am so disappointed in you. We had hoped that you would remain a virgin until you were married. And then she's like, you must never speak of this ever again, and you must never tell your father. And was like, you're on your own. So I received zero support from my mother. And at that point in time, I was just so struggling. I decided to transfer to the University of Texas at Austin. And that really changed the course of my life. I mean, getting away from my parents, finally really getting away from Washington State, starting out on my own. I mean, I was very lost, struggling with the trauma of being raped and not dealing with it. But I mean, I still live in Austin to this day. It opened all kinds of doors for me. So I always find the silver lining in everything. But I really struggled, had a lot of self-hatred, started acting out, being promiscuous, which is apparently, as I later learned, very common for people who've been raped. They start to, they re-traumatize themselves. And so that's what I went through. And then finally in law school, I was in a sort of friends with benefits situation, and started to feel emotions for this guy, and realized that I needed to share with him why my behavior was so odd. And so I sat down at my computer and I wrote the story of my rape. And it was the first time I was ever actually able to tell the story without the filters of judgment or minimizing from, my family or friends telling me, It's not that big a deal, or get over it, or you shouldn't talk about it, you should hide it. I just shared what had happened to me and how it impacted me. And I was really fortunate that the guy that I wrote this story and shared with, he was responsive and offered me grace and was loving and supportive towards me, such that I was finally able to kind of give myself some grace about what had happened to me and start to deal with it and get therapy and move on. And what I talk about in the book is, and I think this is how my book is different than a lot of other, when people talk about rape, is I take the reader on a journey of not only what happened to me, but how I got through the trauma and how I have used that life experience to propel me in life, as opposed to, mire in it and be stuck in the trauma.
What made you, what was your perspective once you sat down and you wrote this letter, and you finally, in other words, finally got it off of your chest, as they say? You were able to put all your emotions within your story and release that. And once you released it, the person that read it was able to hug and hold you in that space. As you began to move Carrington, from there, once you got that validation right at that space, how did you begin to move forward once you got that validation there to your life from that space? How were you able to navigate through there?
Well, I think one of the most important things I did was, and it wasn't immediate, it took me some time, but I finally got into therapy and came to understand that I was not a victim, I was victimized. And I think that's such an important distinction because when you're in the victim mindset, you believe that everything is happening to you and being done to you, and that you are powerless.
Yeah.
Being a victim is a powerless state. Being victimized, saying, I am powerful, but something bad happened to me, is a different state. There's power in that, saying, okay, this happened to me, but it doesn't define me. How can I take what happened to me and learn from it and use it and incorporate it and understand that it is part of my story? I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, but I'm going to look at it, examine it, understand it, and use what I learned from this experience to propel me through life. Use it as a tool. Somehow find what I'm supposed to get from this experience to move forward. And so trust me, what happened to me was ugly and horrible and awful, and as is every rape. But I think that, and it takes time. You have to go through the process. I like to say you have to reach rage to reach forgiveness. You have to feel the anger. You have to acknowledge the pain. You have to grieve the loss of, the innocence that you had before. But as you work through those experiences, start to look at how you can use that experience for good. How is that part of your life something that is a positive change? And so I understood that what had happened to me and all that I had been through actually made me stronger. Yeah. And being stronger helped me in my career and in life. That was really sort of one of the pillars in my resilience, was that experience, but not just the experience, that I had survived it and figured out how to use it to move my life forward instead of getting stuck in this victim state.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, powerful way that you laid it out. And I always try to encourage people about the victim mentality. There's no power there. There's no energy to move you forward through and out of your situation. That energy is designed to keep you in bondage, as they say.
Exactly.
To keep you locked up, to keep you from not growing, keep you from not experiencing the freedom that is in you, the power that is in you. Because when one becomes move from the space of victim to one that is making decisions, you've transitioned from a place of weakness to sheer power. You are now taking control of the trauma that took place in your life. And of course, it is a trauma experience. But you are now taking this and changing the perspective and finding some light within that darkness and
Yes.
grabbing onto that light and moving through the space of your personal growth. You've gone through this and you've begun to learn about who you are in that space. I want you to take a little time, Carrington, because I know right there you are going to have to deal with some additional underlying feelings of the you that is you, meaning that you have to learn how to accept, how to love, how to forgive. All of those nuggets are buried within that conversation that you just talked about, because those are different stages that one have to visit, if you will, in order to overcome that trauma to move forward. You have to learn how to love yourself regardless. You have to begin to speak to yourself differently from those thoughts that are coming continually, the less than thoughts. How did you navigate that? Because a lot of people are there, Carrington, a lot of women are there, and they're bottled up emotionally and everything. Give someone some advice right here, if you will, if you could pause for a moment just to talk to them and to change their perspective as you did with yours?
Well, so I think one of the most powerful books that I've read was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And so Viktor Frankl, he's a Holocaust survivor. Mm-hmm. He's in a concentration camp, and he manages to find peace and to comfort himself while he is in this concentration camp. And one of the things that people have said to me again and again is like, how can you find good in being raped? Like they think it's a crazy thought. I'm like, well, how did Viktor Frankl find, peace and happiness and enlightenment in a concentration camp? Yeah. And the answer is, and he shares this in his book, and that is that, we can't control what's happening to us. It does. It happens to us. We can't control it. But what we can control is two things. And one is what's going on in our head, the story that we tell ourselves. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, how we view or approach the choices we make about how we deal with what happens to us. So it's our mindset and then the choices that we make regarding what is happening. And when you're in the victim mode, you give up both those things. You give up your positive mindset and you give up your ability to make choices. And by doing that, you lose power. But if Viktor Frankl in a concentration camp can, he had this understanding, they can do the most horrible things to me, but I still have this inner dialogue of, peace, joy, enlightenment that they cannot touch. And I have the power to make everyday choices. And so embracing that approach to life has been so powerful for me working through some of life's trauma.
I think it's the key. So here you are, you're moving through, and you are now this young woman came through some trauma so far. You have chosen the profession of a lawyer. Tons of my friends are lawyers, and lawyers know how to party, as they say. So back in the day. And so you have chosen that field. Let me ask you a question. Why did you pick that field?
Well, I asked myself that question. I was brought up in a very rigid environment. And so a couple things. One, I was not exposed to many different professions. I thought that my only choices were doctor, banker, lawyer, accountant, like engineer. Mm-hmm. I think those were like in my mind, like my only options. And I didn't realize there were other options. So I think the other reason I was so attracted to the law was because in my mind, it was very black and white. Mm-hmm. And of course, you get to law school and you realize it's all shades of gray.
Shades of gray.
But back at that time, one of the first therapists I went to gave me a personality test, and it asked all kinds of questions like, if of these 5 types of professions, which one would you choose? And next, other than being a lawyer, I chose cop. I would be a cop. Yeah. And same kind of thing. Like you get to like sort of, it's black and white. You get to decide who's breaking law. Yeah. And he came away from that personality test and said, he goes, wow. He goes, you came from a really difficult, really rigid environment, didn't you? Wow. And so just this multiple choice test, by the choices I made, he was able to determine that. And of course, now I think if I took that test, I've come so far. I'm much more flexible and whatnot. But back then, that was sort of me clinging to, all that I knew to be true. And so anyway, I think that's how I ended up being a lawyer.
So you picked the profession, you got in there, and I know that is a challenging. What type of law did you study?
Study. So I wanted to be a litigator. And so I knew that I wanted to be a trial lawyer. But when I got out of law school, there were like no jobs. It was a terrible, terrible job environment. So I got one of the few jobs that was available, and that was doing, of all things, property tax litigation. Mm-hmm. So I went to law school to avoid numbers, and I ended up doing property tax. But at least it was litigation, so I got to try cases. But, you can understand how I didn't last doing that for very long. So
yeah. So here you are, you're moving through, and you met a young man, you're married. How did you manage you within that relationship? How did you manage you, number one, because you're growing, you came through therapy, you've released
Well, I'm
some
not done with
of,
therapy yet. When I married him, I
okay.
hadn't done my therapy yet. So
Okay, so you're still in therapy and you met this young man and you guys got married. How did you manage that relationship? Because the reason why I'm asking this question, the onset of our conversation, you mentioned this little thing about trust, but we haven't talked
oh
about
yeah.
it yet. So, and trust usually is manifested within a relationship. So how did you manage that relationship
It was a
where
complete
I'm sure
disaster.
that underlying thing is still there?
Oh,
How
it
did
gets
that
worse. I
go?
mean, the reason that I got married to my first husband
Yeah.
was because of a breach of trust with my parents. So my parents had
Hmm.
told me, I mean, there were many, many, many layers to this, but the final straw that broke the camel's back was I was in the hospital during my third year of law school, and my father's a doctor. And so I asked the gentleman that I ended up marrying, I asked him to call my father to conference with the doctors to figure out what was going on with me. And so he calls my father and he hands me the phone and says, your dad wants to talk to you. And my dad comes on the line and he says, well, your mother and I have been talking and we've decided that we're not paying for this.
Hmm.
And he was gone. No flowers,
Wow.
no get well soon card, no visit in the hospital, no conferencing with the doctors. All I got was, we're not paying for this. And in that moment, the abandonment of me by my family was complete. It was like, we could give two, two nothings. I don't use a swear word. That about you was kind of the message I got. And so literally he took me from the hospital to the justice of the peace. Had been getting shot up with Demerol for 5 days. I was still drugged up. He took me to the
Yeah.
justice of the peace and married me. And to this day, I mean, I remember some like really awful carpet and some wood panel walls. I remember nothing of the ceremony, nothing of it.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because
no, it's hysterical. It's funny. I mean, I laugh at it. It's now it makes for a good book, but that was my reality. And no, there was no trust there. I mean, I married a bar manager from Bourbon Street, New Orleans. I am a lawyer from this upper crust family, and I'm marrying a bar manager from Bourbon Street. And the whole thing is laughable. So yeah, there was no trust. It didn't last very long. So I did go to the second round.
Stuff for a book.
I know, it's great stuff for a book. And I think one of the other things that's important, and it kind of goes into my second marriage, is we talk about programming, and we're not just programmed by the trauma and the messages that we receive in life, but we're also programmed by the patterns and that we are exposed to and experience. And for me, the template, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Your parents' relationship is a template for yours. You are sort of damned to repeat it unless you consciously are aware that you do not want to and really work at not repeating it. And for me, my mother was, I like to say, the poster child for codependency. She gave up her very identity to my father. She made no decisions. She had no independent thought. And everything in her life revolved around being, the wife of this doctor. And so I became the person that thought my whole reason for existence was to be the wife of someone. And so I gave up my identity to be the wife of someone. And boy, was that a big mistake. But I didn't even know I was doing it. I wasn't even aware, because it's something that becomes so ingrained because you're watching your parents' relationship. You don't even realize you're doing it. So again, makes for a good book. But
I think the parents also does some programming into that. Religion also has a part in that.
big
Society
time.
as a whole also has a part in that concept of the wife surrendering everything that she is in order to make the family work. And I think I would challenge a couple before they get married to sit down and really walk through that, because I would want my wife to be whole. I want her to invest time and the energy and the wisdom to search to become the best that she can be, the best individual apart from me. And I do the same. And then when we bring that unit together, and that's a powerful a way to have a marriage, because I believe that if the woman with the first model, she becomes empty. She becomes this thing that is working. She goes to work, then she comes home and after work, and then the kids have needs, the husband have needs. She got to put herself on the side, and she gets lost. And so,
Oh,
and I think
absolutely.
that's
That's
a
so true.
recipe for failure in any society. And I think somehow we need to fix that. And the only way that I could see it is if those two people on the onset have that conversation. How many of us are trained to have that conversation? None of us. We are trained to get into the marriage, get kids, get the white picket fence, the 2 point something children, and that dog. You can't forget the dog, because that's the program that we receive, and it
Yeah.
doesn't work. That's why the
Divorce
divorce
rate's so
rate
high.
is at so
Yeah.
high, because that model is broken. And so until we fix that, I don't think it'll ever happen. So here you are, you're in the second one. The first one is just, I can't even describe what
Funny.
how to talk about that one. But the
Yeah.
second one, you were, and you could see it. This is society's programming. You got into this program now, and you're now living within that space. Talk to me about there, because I know what's happening to you at this point, because inside of you, it doesn't matter what you do, inside of you is dying. You're dying, just dying
Yeah.
every day.
Withering.
Um,
Yeah.
so talk to me about that, because I believe that's the piece I believe that calls situation into our life to give us our awakening. Talk to me about your time there, and how did you manage, and also talk to me about this trust issue, because this thing doesn't go away overnight.
You're
This
giving me therapy
every
right now. You're making me realize things I didn't even realize. So you're right. You're right. Actually,
it yeah.
there's a chapter in my book that I call Men, Money, and Marriage. And people
Mhm.
ask me, like, why did you tie those three things together? And for
Yeah.
me, it's because from childhood, I mean, I was taught to look to my father for money, and he created this really sick dynamic with money where he would
Yeah.
threaten, I'm going to, take money away from you. He'd like give you money, it was this weird. And then like
Power
abandoning me,
play.
say, I'm not going to pay for this. It was a very
Yeah.
twisted dynamic about money. And of course, observing my parents' marriage also. So in my mind, those three were very intertwined. And
Mhm.
so they're definitely, one of the final straws that broke the camel's back of my second marriage was the lack of trust with money. And so that really should come as no surprise to me. But even as I'm talking to you, I'm having this realization. So, but with him, I wanted to be the perfect wife, and I became that perfect wife. I mean, I had parties at the house and hosted things and all of that. And we started out having a great, beautiful life, beautiful home, all the right friends, members of the country club, all of that.
Mhm.
But life intervened and a lot happened. And if you don't have the right foundation, your marriage just isn't going to survive. And
Yeah.
the foundation we had set up, and I blame myself very much. I mean, I don't say this is just him. I was living out a template that I'd been set up for. So I believed that I was supposed to give 100% of myself to him. And so that's what I was doing. But if you can't give all the time and get nothing in return. And what happened is his father died. I was pregnant with my first son, and 9 days after he was born, his mother suddenly died. And then, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So basically we wiped out three grandparents in a period of a year. And all that was left was the asshole, excuse my French, but the bad one. And so, I mean, it was really, and my poor husband had lost both of his parents in the period of a year. he has a newborn son. And then when they go to read the will, we find out that somehow everything's going to his stepfather, which we knew was not the intention of his mother. She was regularly telling the kids that should go to them. So there's that layered on top of everything else. And it just was one thing after another. And he just never could quite get on his feet. He had so much going on, and he didn't have the resources from family. He just lost his mother and father. All he had left was a sister. So it was a lot.
Wow. That's, that's a lot to navigate all at once. Dealing with that trauma, that loss, that deep personal loss of being the family, and then also the emotional trauma of what happened with the will and the financing. Yeah, I could see where someone can get lost within that framework, and you on the other side dealing with him, as you
trying
said.
to be supportive and loving, and really just giving myself away, like. Yeah. And he could not. He has a different approach to life. Now I realize he's a glass half empty person, and I'm a glass overflowing person. So for him, he just has always struggled with seeing the positive in things. And so if you've been dealt all of that in life, he could not get out of the mire. Yeah. And it was a really, really, really rough road.
Yeah, the dealing with him was reference to your father.
Yeah.
You were stuck with him, as you said. So here you are. You're in this situation, and you could see the trauma there. And from this trauma, you guys, how long did it last, and how did you end? We know that you stated that you ended in a second divorce. How was that? Because again, that is a trauma for both of you guys and your son.
Yeah. Well, it got to a place where he was so deeply depressed that he was engaging in destructive behavior and was not supporting the family. He had lost his job. He had gained a lot of weight. He was just kind of laying on the couch, and I said to him, like, what's the plan? And he said, the plan is you're going to work harder. Wow. So once again, there I am with no support. And so there's that breach of trust again. And so that was when it was sort of the light bulb moment for me, and realizing, I'm dying here. I am withering and dying. There's nothing here for me. And I needed to get out of that relationship. And I needed to do it not just for me, but for my kids, because they needed at least one healthy parent. And I knew that I could do that, but I had to get out of the situation. And so, thankfully, he's in a much better place today. It's been a long journey. And I 100% believe that, it was the right decision to get divorced for me and for my kids. It was not an easy decision by any means, but I stand by it. And I think, I'm super blessed I definitely was determined to create a positive environment between me and him so that we could co-parent well together. And we've been successful with that. And to the point that I let him read the book in advance, because it was so important to me to not do anything to cause harm to the relationship, not just for me, but for our kids. So,
So here you are, this woman going through so much. How are you dealing with your trust issues?
Well, I thought, I created this book group that had been my safety net through a lot of this stuff. And when I got divorced, I thought, okay, I've got my safety net, I've got my book group. And yet that wasn't true either. All of a sudden I had friends that turned on me, and you have to, I know we're running long on time here, so people have to read the book as far as
okay. We're going to point the people to the book, but your journey is a wonderful journey. And I think those that are listening, is my hope. This is why I'm asking these questions, because I'm hoping that the audience that is listening to us, that those that can identify within your journey can reach to you, because you have made it, you've walked through, and you can help them. One of the tools that you have created, and those that are listening to us, the tool that she had created, she gave birth, is the book, Blooming. And you need to buy those books and give them as presents to people, because it is laden with tools for people can utilize so that they can become free and grow as an individual. Talk to us, because I know life will. One of my gurus used to say, "Life, let life disturb your comfort." And so, when we get comfortable with certain things within our lives that we haven't dealt with, life has a way of disturbing it. And that's why I keep coming back to this aspect of trust, because that is a major thing. And life has been giving you some beautiful opportunities for you to dig a little deeper, pull away those layers to get beyond that thing, because that was embedded in you as a young woman. And it is a tremendous, it's a powerful thing that we have to deal with. So I was fishing to see how are you doing as you are dealing with this.
I am doing, pretty well. I think one of the, obviously I have repeat experiences with trust throughout life, but I think that as we have those issues, God gives us tools. And for me, one of the best tools God gave me was intuition. And that has been something where, the thing about intuition is we feel it before we have a conscious thought. And what happens is we tend to dismiss it. And so for me, each of these life experiences has helped me to hear my intuition more loudly. I like to say sometimes it screams at me. And so I hear the subconscious before the conscious thought, and I have learned to embrace it. And this is a little bit of a diversion, I guess, but I've learned to trust that so much that when I meet people and interact with them, I will have an initial response to them about who they are, and what kind of vibe they have, and what the immediate information I gather from their body language, their dialogue, all of those things. And I have learned to trust what my feeling is about that person. And it's very protective. And so I don't necessarily, while I have good trust with some people, I also don't let myself be subjected to having my trust violated like I used to, because I immediately recognize people for who they are, as opposed to letting myself get involved with people who could harm me.
I have my thesis on that is this. I believe that we are spirit that is housed within a body. We have a soul and we are housed within the body. Man has learned how to manipulate all of the five natural senses. But that intuition that you're talking about is the spirit of the man. And when that spirit of the man sees another spirit that they know is crooked or not right, it will send all kinds of senses and alarms within the individual. And like you said, if you are aware of it. And I guarantee you, Carrington, if you go back in life, because I have this conversation with people all the time, because I was trying to build this thesis around this. Every single relationship that you ever got into, you talked that voice out of what it was saying. Because I remember it in my relationships that I talked, because they would present and I would say, but she is gorgeous. She loves the same type of music that I do. We get along fine. These are some of the words that we use to talk that spirit man into subjection and to lord over him. And then the next thing you know, we have spent 5 years, 10 years in our life and got ripped apart because we weren't listening to that voice that was telling us, get away from this person. I guarantee you that happens to everyone. I've asked this thousands of people that I've met. I asked that very same question because I want to prove that thesis. And the day, Carrington, that a man learns how to manipulate that, we are finished. The human race is done, because he's going to have a podcast. He's going to teach them how to do it, and the whole world is over, So I think that's something that God has put into us, that if we are alert to it as you are, and you have learned how to trust it over the natural realm, and it will save you much time and much pain. And that is one of the gifts that is given to us for our spirit man to be used, and you are using it tremendously in your life. I want to thank you, Carrington, for spending your time and trusting us with your journey, your wisdom, your pain, your joy, all of it. And I want to encourage everyone to purchase her book, get in touch with her so that she can usher you into that next phase of your personal development. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thank you, Ken. And yeah, the book is Blooming, Finding Gifts in the Shit of Life. And just so people understand, I use that word very purposefully because it's a double entendre. And that is, shit is quite literally fertilizer. And it's in life's messes, difficulties, traumas that we find what we need to bloom into greatness. So Blooming, Finding Gifts in the Shit of Life by Carrington Smith, available on Amazon. And it's also available on Audible. And you can find me on my social is at CarringtonATX. And I hope that, and my website is carrington-smith.com.
And we will put all of those things within the show notes so that they can have access to it. We put everything, all of your Facebook, everything that we can find on you, we'll try to put it there so they can have access, so that it is my hope that they do contact you and purchase your book and start growing up. It's time for us to grow up. And
thank you, Ken. I really appreciate our time together.
Thank you.